That realization hits like a slap because it dismantles the fantasy you built brick by brick in your own head. You weren't running toward them. You were running toward how they made you feel in a very specific moment, under very specific conditions that no longer exist. The rush, the validation, the sense of being seen, chosen, elevated. People confuse that chemical spike for connection, and once it's gone, they swear the person changed. No, the stimulus changed. The context changed. The role you played in their life shifted. But instead of confronting the emptiness left behind, you chase the source, hoping it will trigger the same response again. That's not love. That's conditioning. And the cruel part is how easy it is for someone else to control you once they realize you're hooked on a feeling instead of reality. What keeps the chase alive is intermittent reinforcement, the same psychological trap that keeps gamblers glued to broken machines. Sometimes they give you warmth, sometimes they pull away, sometimes they act like you matter, sometimes they disappear. That inconsistency wires your brain to associate pursuit with reward. You don't crave them. You crave the relief that comes when the silence breaks, the smile after the cold shoulder, the text after the doubt. And the more you chase, the more power shifts out of your hands. Because anyone who controls your emotional state controls your behavior. They don't even have to try hard. All they have to do is withhold. And you fill in the gaps with hope, fantasy, and self-blame. Disrespect slips in quietly when you're chasing an emotion. You tolerate things you'd never accept if your mind was clear. Late replies become normal. Broken promises get rationalized. Boundaries blur because you're afraid enforcing them might cost you the feeling you're addicted to. And the other side senses this imbalance instantly. They feel the leverage. They may not name it, but they act on it. Attention becomes currency. Distance becomes a weapon. And every time you chase, every time you explain yourself, every time you overextend, the dynamic tilts further. You're no longer engaging as an equal. You're negotiating for emotional scraps while telling yourself it's connection. Silence is where the truth starts to surface, and that's why silence scares you. When the noise stops, when the chasing pauses, you're left alone with the uncomfortable question you've been avoiding. If the emotion disappeared tomorrow, what would remain of this bond? Strip away the highs, the longing, the anxiety, the anticipation, and what's left is often frighteningly thin. That's why you keep moving. Stillness would force clarity, and clarity would force a decision. It's easier to keep chasing than to admit you were attached to a feeling that no one can sustain forever. Emotions spike. People don't owe you permanence in a state that was never stable to begin with. The other side unravels differently. When you stop chasing the emotion, when you pull your energy back and reclaim silence, the balance shocks them. The supply dries up. The reactions slow. The predictability vanishes. Suddenly they're the ones wondering. Suddenly they're the ones replaying conversations. That's when you see how much of the connection depended on your pursuit. The moment you stop feeding the dynamic, its fragility becomes obvious. And that's not cruelty. That's physics. Remove energy from a system built on imbalance, and it collapses. What looked powerful was just dependent. Your rise begins the moment you separate the feeling from the person. When you recognize that what you're craving is internal, not external, something shifts. You stop assigning godlike power to someone who was merely a trigger. You realize the emotion was yours all along, temporarily activated by circumstance, chemistry, timing. That realization is humiliating at first. It feels like betrayal by your own mind. But it's also liberation. Because if the feeling came from within, you don't need to chase anyone to experience it again. You need to build a life that generates it naturally, consistently, without permission. Power politics change the instant you stop chasing emotions. You become harder to manipulate because you're no longer reactive. Distance stops feeling like punishment. Attention stops feeling like oxygen. You engage by choice, and people feel that shift immediately. Conversations change tone. Dynamics reset. Some connections fade because they were never about mutual presence, only emotional extraction. Others recalibrate because respect returns when desperation leaves. You don't need to announce the change. It announces itself through your calm, your selectivity, your refusal to over-explain. There's a deep psychological strength in letting an emotion pass without acting on it. Most people never learn this. They confuse intensity with truth, urgency with importance. But emotions are weather, they move. They change, they lie. When you stop obeying them blindly, you regain authorship over your behavior. And behavior is where real power lies. Anyone can feel something. Few can feel it and choose differently. That choice is what separates controlled lives from chaotic ones. That choice is what scares people who relied on your predictability. The shift in power isn't loud or dramatic, it's subtle. You respond slower, you speak less. You don't chase clarity from people who benefit from keeping you confused. That restraint forces others to reveal their intentions. Those who valued you adjust. Those who valued the emotion withdraw. Either way, you gain information without asking for it. And information is leverage when you don't broadcast it. You're no longer performing for a reaction. You're observing patterns and choosing alignment over impulse. Eventually, the chase feels embarrassing in hindsight, not because you cared, but because you mistook a feeling for a person. You projected permanence onto something designed to fluctuate. You handed over power to someone who didn't even realize they had it. That realization doesn't harden you. It clarifies you. You stop romanticizing inconsistency. You stop confusing longing with depth. You stop chasing the echo of a moment that already served its purpose. Running in circles feels productive when panic disguises itself as motion. Movement creates the illusion of control, the comforting lie that effort equals progress. Chasing the echo of an old emotion keeps the nervous system busy, flooded with hope and dread in equal measure, so stillness never has a chance to expose the truth. The mind clings to familiar intensity because familiarity feels safer than emptiness, even when it hurts. Standing still looks like surrender to those addicted to motion, yet it's the most violent interruption imaginable. It cuts the feedback loop. It denies the brain its favorite drug. When the chase stops, the withdrawal begins, and that's where most people turn back. They mistake discomfort for danger. But discomfort is just the sound of an illusion collapsing. If the emotion mattered only when it was running, then it wasn't strength. It was a treadmill. Stepping off doesn't erase the past. It reclaims the future from a pattern that was never going anywhere. Letting an emotion pass without acting on it feels like betrayal to the old self who believed urgency was truth. The body protests. Thoughts plead. Memories stage a parade to convince you that now is different, that one more reach will restore the magic. This is conditioning speaking, not destiny. When a feeling fades and nothing catastrophic follows, a quiet lesson settles in. The world doesn't end when a craving goes unanswered. Power grows in that gap. Standing still teaches the nervous system a new rule: intensity is optional. Choice returns. The old compulsion loses its grip because the brain learns it can survive without the spike. That learning rewires behavior more effectively than any promise or apology ever could. The past emotion becomes a chapter instead of a command, and chapters don't get to steer the book once the page turns. Building something grounded begins with refusing to outsource regulation. When moods depend on another person's proximity or approval, autonomy dissolves. Groundedness restores authorship. It's constructed through habits that don't negotiate with volatility. Sleep that isn't bargained away for late-night texts. Work that progresses regardless of praise. Movement that steadies the body when thoughts race. These choices don't look dramatic, they look boring. Boredom is stability's camouflage. Stability frightens people who profit from chaos because it cannot be rushed or bribed. Once internal rhythms replace external triggers, the lever disappears. Nobody can hijack an inner state that doesn't hinge on them. That's not coldness. That's sovereignty earned through repetition. There's a political dimension to inner control that most never notice. Emotional volatility is easy to govern. Predictable reactions make manipulation cheap. Grounded individuals are expensive to move. They don't leap at silence or melt under attention. That neutrality doesn't kill connection, it purifies it. When urgency evaporates, curiosity replaces it. Engagement becomes selective, the noise thins out. Those who relied on reaction lose access. Those who value presence adjust. Power shifts not through confrontation, but through scarcity. Attention becomes intentional. Time becomes guarded. Decisions slow down just enough to expose motives before damage occurs. This isn't isolation, it's filtration. And filtration is how systems stay alive. Standing still also resurrects memory with clarity instead of longing. The past emotion loses its glamour when examined without adrenaline. What once felt transcendent often reveals itself as context, dependent, fragile, or transactional. That revelation hurts, but it heals faster than denial. Running keeps memory romanticized. Stillness lets it age. As memory matures, it stops commanding behavior. Lessons surface where fantasies once stood. Boundaries feel natural instead of forced. The heart learns that intensity isn't proof of meaning. Consistency is. And consistency can't be chased. It's built. The discipline to let feelings pass teaches patience, and patience sharpens perception. Patterns become obvious when you're not racing to satisfy them. Who reaches only when chased? Who withdraws when met with calm? Who respects limits without testing them? This information was always there, drowned out by urgency. Standing still amplifies it. Decisions become cleaner because the signal-to-noise ratio improves. Alignment replaces longing. The world looks less dramatic and more legible. That legibility is a weapon. It prevents repetition. It protects time. It reduces regret. It keeps the same mistake from wearing a different face. Grounded construction changes identity at the root. Self-trust replaces hope. Hope waits. Self-trust acts. When internal states stabilize, promises lose their power to sway. Flattery doesn't inflate. Distance doesn't wound. Responses slow down, and with slower responses come better outcomes. People sense the shift without being told. Conversations recalibrate. Pressure tactics fail. Emotional bids lose their sting. The chase collapses because there's nothing to chase anymore. The center holds. That holding creates gravity. Gravity attracts what belongs and repels what feeds on imbalance. There's grief in choosing stillness, and it deserves respect. Grief for the fantasy that a person could deliver permanence to a feeling designed to move. Grief for the time spent confusing urgency with intimacy. This grief doesn't ask for witnesses. It asks for honesty. Sitting with it completes the cycle. Running keeps the wound open. Stillness stitches it shut. When grief resolves, desire becomes cleaner. Attraction sharpens. You stop reaching for echoes and start building sound. The difference is night and day. One exhausts. The other endures. The practical outcome of this shift is freedom from hijack. Messages don't spike cortisol. Silence doesn't dictate mood. Presence doesn't require performance. Inner weather steadies. Decisions align with values instead of cravings. The world still offers temptation, but temptation loses its authority. That authority belonged to urgency, not truth. Truth moves slower. It doesn't beg. It doesn't threaten. It waits until behavior catches up. When behavior aligns, peace follows. Not the fragile kind, but the durable kind that survives disappointment without collapsing.